All right, this is Avi
And Pat,
from Nite, and you are watching.
Richard Metal Fan.
Hey, what's up, guys? Episode 326 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom, and I'm here with one half of Night. So, how are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Doing
Yeah.
awesome. Good to be here.
Oh, yeah. It's great to be able to talk with you guys. So, kind of what I want to talk about is, of course, like y'all's musical history, as I want to also talk about the new Night album, but take me back to when guys were growing up. So, kind of growing up, what were like the first bands that got you into metal and what made you want to play respective instruments? So, who wants to go first?
Oh man. Mine's like super obvious. And this was before I lived in the Bay Area. I grew up in northeastern Ohio. But I had Ride the Lightning
Nice.
on cassette and I like wore that tape out. I listened to it so much. It's still my favorite Metallica album, and it's
Yeah, it's
still
best production wise.
I agree. And just fell in love with the just fantasy and the grandiosity of heavy metal. It kind of that's when I decided that's what I needed to do the rest of my life.
All
That
right.
record.
And what about you, Avinash?
Yeah, so this is probably showing my age in a pretty specific way, but when I was like 11 or 12 years old, there was a video game that came out called Guitar Hero.
Played that when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so that for folks that may remember that video game, it was like you had like a toy guitar with five buttons that were like five frets or something like that. And the soundtrack to it, you could tell that the folks that made this game were huge metalheads because that first one had Judas Priest, it had Ozzy Osbourne, it had Black Sabbath, it had Megadeth, so many amazing bands. And I just fell and I knew right away which songs connected with me. And so I fell in love with that soundtrack. And from there, went to record stores in the Bay Area like Amoeba and Rasputin and picked up CDs and vinyl. And the rest is history. And found myself playing four bands at the age of 32.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, you're not that far from me. I'm like almost gonna be 31 in a couple weeks.
Cool.
Right
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, and it's cool, kind of funny because I think Guitar Hero and Rock Band are slowly coming back because I know there's like these like Twitch streamers that are doing playthroughs, but they also have like custom things where they can even adjust the speed so they could play it like even faster than the original. Almost like a
Damn.
yeah. So it's kind of funny how it's died off, but now it's like sort of making somewhat of a comeback.
That's wild. I mean, it's you know what, whatever route that folks have to get into this music, to get into this culture, to find out about bands that they fall in love with, it's like I'm all about it. Like you can never guess what kind of path you take in here, you know.
All
For
right.
sure.
All right. And so what were you guys' like bands before starting up Night?
I so the most recent bands that I was in prior to Night was a more kind of like doom death metal band called Serpents of Dawn. And that was with Kyle House, who was in Acephalix and Bastum and one of the founding members of Necrot. And yeah, that was kind of my main project before Night. And then I play in like a 70s rock band called Older Sun. I've because I'm a drummer, I'm in a lot of projects.
It's always like
But
a Metal Archives. It's like the fucking drummer has like the most bands.
yeah, because nobody wants to play drums. But I'm always in at least usually three or four different projects at a time, and depending on if they're recording or touring or just kind of like a local band with friends that I'm just doing for fun. But right now, Night is for sure my main project, my main focus.
All right. And you, Avinash?
Yeah, so prior to Night, I had one what I'll say is a working band called Wild Hunt. I played bass in that band. And like Patrick, I've had various studio projects and bands that I've like filled in on shows with. And yeah, these days it's all over the place as far as like, projects that are studio only, ones that like I'll jump in to play live with, others that I'm a full-time member of. But yeah, Wild Hunt was my main band before Night. And
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
All right. And then of course like I guessing for you, Patrick. So how did Nights first started? Because y'all formed in 2018.
Yeah, so the origins of the band were all from our lead vocalist and guitarist Van Labrakis. He is of Greek descent, but he moved to the States, I believe he was in Berlin, in Germany for 10 years. But he was in LA, had a bunch of demos, moved to the Bay Area. And right when he moved here through mutual friends, we met and had these demos that became the foundations of Nite. And he just was looking for like-minded musicians that could make this project a reality. And those demos that he'd been working on for years became effectively what was the foundations of the first album, Darkness, Silence, Mirror, Flame, which we released in 2020, right as the pandemic was starting.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was the foundations of the band. Prior to Avinash taking over bass duties, our good friend Brian Coons was our original bass player, which we played our first shows with him and did our earliest stuff. He relocated to Arizona, and Avinash stepped in to take over the bass axe.
Yeah, yeah, but that first album, I just like love Darkness, Silence, Mirror, Flame. Like I was like
Awesome.
listening to it like I was listening to y'all's discography for a couple of days in part, just to familiarize myself. So, what was sort of
Right.
like the writing and recording process like, being that was sort of like the debut full length Night album?
Well, it was, to be perfectly honest, it was mainly an album made by Van and myself. We still hadn't really secured a second lead guitarist, which we eventually found in Scott Hoffman, also of High Spirits and Dawnbringer. But Van and I really kind of basically tried to make those demos more three-dimensional. The demos were great and they were good compositions, and it was up to us to kind of make them just feel a little, larger than life. And as a first album, it's always challenging because you're still looking for your sound a little bit, but I feel like Van had an idea that was very fully realized in that it was traditional 70s, 80s heavy metal with this black metal vocal style. And I think we really were just trying to sort of, with the first record, do as much as we could to explore what that meant.
Yeah,
And yeah, I think as a first record, it's a really solid effort. I will say that I feel like each record we've done has successively gotten better, and I feel like we're on a good upswing. But
yeah.
we love the first album. We still play songs from the first album live, so it's always going to be with us.
Yeah, and I agree with you on there, Patrick, because I feel like the debut album is always a learning experience, because you have like your entire life to write the first album, and of course I love the mixture of like heavy metal with sort of like the darker kind of gothy kind of thing. So it's fair to say like you and everybody else in the band sort of like brings in like their own influence and style into Night.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know, no, of course, during the time it was during like the pandemic, I know it really kind of like fucked up the whole music industry. So did like the pandemic at all sort of like influence the album sonically, or did you try to like keep that completely separate?
Uh,
Well,
Go
I'll,
ahead.
I'll answer, I'll answer the first part of this, and then Avi, if you want to take the second part. So I'll just talk about the first record. We recorded the whole album, Van and myself, and then had Scott come in and do some overdubs on guitar pre-pandemic. So when we released Darkness, Silence, Mirror, Flame, it came out in March of 2020. So literally like the week of lockdown. So everything was recorded in person and in our studio. Uh, but then the album came out and we were supposed to do all these shows and all these tours, and nothing happened. And then Avi can speak to the second album because he was part of that process.
Yeah, so the world was still pretty shut down when Scott gave me the call saying, "Hey, I think we were looking for a bass player, and your name came up." And so when I joined the band, it was me talking with Van and hopping on Zoom with Pat and Scott, and kind of say saw videos of myself playing with Wild Hunt. We exchanged some files over email. Like Van picked up pretty quick that like I knew my way around Pro Tools, and maybe not as nearly as adept as an engineer as he is, but kind of speak the same language, and that I played with the Rickenbacker, that I played with the pick, that we had a lot of the same musical influences, even though our age difference was, here. But joined during the pandemic. As soon as I kind of got the go ahead saying, "Hey, you're in the band," it was like, all right, it's like a fire hose. Learn not just the new record, Voice of the Cronian Moon, so I could contribute to it, but also the first one too, because at that time we were like, who the hell knows when we're going to be able to play live, not just maybe out from the future, maybe it'll be in a month. And so the goal there was like get the band as live ready as quickly as possible, just having all our shit ready to go so that within a practice or two, we'd just be ready to rock, which was kind of incredible that it actually happened, you know?
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, totally. And then you going into the second album, Voices of the Cronian Moon. I love that album because usually with the debut full length album, you have a lot of hype with the first album and you have your entire life to write, like I mentioned before. And then of course there's always that pressure with the second album. Did you feel like any pressure to follow up Darkness, Silence, Mirror Flame?
I think there was, but it was, as Avi was alluding to, it was such a strange, weird, unprecedented time with us literally exchanging files just mostly back and forth over, Dropbox. And it just it was the weirdest album I've ever made because we recorded the entire record in isolation. Like we have a studio where we record all of our music, but like I literally tracked all the drums just alone with my laptop, just hitting record and then do a take. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll overdub this part. I mean, I'm not an engineer, so like I had to kind of like learn how to use these tools really quickly. And so it was a very strange album to make, but I think with all of the sort of unprecedented challenges before us, I think we made the best album we ever could have made in a in an isolated, pandemic stricken universe, which none of us ever could have anticipated. So yeah, it was it's 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 the second album. I think it's of again a big step forward from the first album. And it will always be the pandemic record for us.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I also love there's also the kind of like that influence of new wave of British heavy metal here, especially there's some parts of the black metal in here. So I feel like even like with the album artwork with the sort of like the hooded figure, almost kind of like I consider it you guys' as like darkest album to date.
Totally. And I think that because we were just sort of like in this realm of trying to escape, and we were really just everybody was so sort of like isolated and contained within their uh wherever they were living, we really wanted to create this sort of like outer space, themed album. How do we escape not only our world but our universe and do something that's a little more expansive and bigger?
Yeah. And of course now we got the new album Cult of the Serpent Sun, which comes out next week. So can you guys give me the rundown of the whole writing and recording process, how the whole thing came to be and that good stuff?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I found out when I joined Nite was that these guys get to work on a new record pretty much right away as soon as the last one's done. So, we worked, Van started sending demos pretty much right away after Voices of Crony Moon was completed. And so, there were a few that were like, oh, yeah, this is cool. Okay, we think this is kind of an interesting thematic direction. But the first demo that he sent, where the rest of the band, we were like, okay, this is what's up, what actually became The Last Blade. And I think
Mhm.
that might have been summer 2022 when we kind of got
Oh
that one.
wow, already. Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah, right. It's pretty wild. And so that was one that, and Van always picks up on the energy of the rest of the band
Yeah.
when he saw how excited we were by kind of like that stomping kind of street level feel on that. He was like, okay, I think this is a direction that we can go in. And so that's when kind of the musical theme started to germinate a little bit. And then at one point, Pat and I went on, we were driving in the van on one night on tour. And then I think Pat tells the story far better than I do. And that's when things really started cooking.
Yeah.
We were Avi and I were on tour with our good friends Bewitcher from Portland, Oregon.
Love the band.
Great band. We so Nite did our first proper tour supporting Bewitcher on our first trip to Hell's Heroes, the festival in Houston, Texas, put on by our good friend Christian from Necrofire. We became really close with Bewitcher. They had a really big tour that they landed with Cavalera to support them on their Beneath the Remains uh, second leg of their tour. Their drummer Eris was unavailable to do it, so I actually had to fill in on drums. And then Avi came and helped us run merch. So we had a lot of long drives late at night through desolate places like Alligator Alley in Florida, and I think we were trying to really kind of key in on what we wanted the sonic qualities of the new record to embody as far as like the rhythm section goes. So for us, that was, a really big touch point for us was Sabotage, maybe because we were in Florida. I don't know. But just especially early Sabotage, Power of the Night, um, things that kind of like had this sort of like stomping, heavy, four on the floor feel, but gave lots of room for the guitar to kind of like, add a lot of color and personality and theatricality, which I think comes through on this record. So yeah, it's great having a long lead time for us with pre-production. We try to really take our time and make sure that we're choosing the best set of songs for the next album, but also try to keep on a schedule. We want to release a new record every 2 or 3 years, as we can. Obviously, it depends on our label schedule and things beyond our control. But we really want to try to get music out there regularly because you want to keep present in people's minds.
Yeah.
If you go away for 4 or 5 years, people forget about you. So
Yeah. And musically, did you wanted to continue in the same vein as Voices of the Cronian Moon, or did you wanted to try something new or different that Nite hasn't done before?
So one thing that we did really latch on to from Voices of the Cronian Moon was that we found that when we played those songs live, a song like the Trident really connected with folks because of that big chanty chorus. And so from that, we were like, okay, can we do that for even more songs, like if not all of them? And so for Cult of the Serpent Sun, big time. So Death Eternal, The Skull Will Never Be Yours. Um, yeah, we tried really hard to latch on to like big, shouty, chanty choruses that folks could, I don't know, sing back at us when we're playing live. So there's that aspect of it. That was kind of a new playing ground for Nite. And there's also just some faster tempos in there, just a bit of a grimier feel, as Pat's alluding to, that kind of stomping forward to the floor kind of rhythm section stomp. That was people had associated Nite with the Gallop before, the kind of Iron Maiden-y sound. And this was a bit more in like a almost I don't want to say an American direction, but something I hear a little more in kind of American metal bands, I
Yeah.
think at least.
Yeah, it could be like the American Steve Harrison, Nico McBrain.
we will take it every day, all day long.
Yeah. Yeah. And what would you say like the overall like theme and sort of like the messages for Cult of the Serpent Sun?
A lot of the thematic structure that happened with the lyrical approach on this one was harkening back to ancient history. So a lot of things that we were exploring were sort of ancient cults, underground sort of societies, things that existed outside of the norm. Which when you go back far enough in history, who knows how much of that is actually real and how much of that's just fabrication. But I think we got really enchanted by this idea of like there's something that's always existing just below, the surface. There's something very like literally like bubbling underground. And because on our second album, Voices of the Cronian Moon, we were in space, we were like, let's kind of come back to Earth and really kind of like start to explore the subterranean. So it's not a concept record, but all of the songs are sort of, thematically linked in just kind of their overall attitude and approach. So yeah, we try to write lyrics that have a universality to them. So like we want to have themes that resonate with as many people as we can. So we're not going to get hyper specific about anything like political or contemporary issues because that sort of like I think paints you into a corner as far as like you can only really reach so many people. I think we want to have big universal themes that resonate with as many people as we can. So we try to keep it a little more vague, and I mean that in the best way possible.
All right. And of course, this is the second album on Season of Mist Records. So how is the relationship between the label?
It gets better and better. I mean, they already took such good care of us for Voices of the Cronian Moon. Like we felt like our music was getting out there in such a bigger way, like not just in literal distribution, but also in promotion. And that's the really cool thing about the modern day record labels, that they're not just like getting it in stores, they're acting as curators. They're like, folks know it's like, oh, this is a release on Season of Mist. If I have this kind of taste, if I like Rotting Christ, if I like Necrofire, then maybe I'll dig Nite too.
Yeah, or
So
Karakongren. Another season of Misband.
Yeah.
Nice. And also I think for us, you know, having not only somebody in your corner to support your band and obviously, you know, help you out financially and with distribution, but it's good to have another sounding board, you know, like they've been very sort of vocal and supportive of the direction the band is going, and they've really sort of pushed us to kind of make sure that we are being as true to ourselves as you can while trying to grow the audience of the band as much as possible.
Cool. And I've only heard like the first few singles being The Mystic, Crow, The Fear of the Night, and even the title track. And even those, just from those songs alone, I feel like it's more matured than Voices of the Cronian Moon. So was that sort of like I guess like the mind frame when it came to making the Cult of the Serpent Sun?
Totally. I mean, I think each album we try to, you know, push ourselves to grow more, to, you know, like mature more, make better decisions that maybe are not necessarily so you know, singular and kind of like trying to serve our own interest or our own purposes. So like as Avi was discussing, like we have an audience now that we're sort of in a way responsible to. And I think a lot of artists see that as a hindrance or you know, a negative thing. And I think for us, it's been great because we love getting feedback from our audience. When people tell us they love a certain song or a certain style or a certain thing that we're doing, we learn a ton from that because when you're, you know, a musician and an artist, you're so close to your art, you can't see it anymore. You can't hear it anymore. Like we're not the best judge of our songs. So for us, when we write a song and it resonates with people, like Crow, Fear of the Night, our first single off this album, people have come you know, from all sides of the world to like tell us how much they love that song. And that means something to us. It's not just, oh, thanks, yeah, great. You know, like we actually are like we're taking notes and we're listening to what people are saying, and we're trying to sort of, you know, make the best possible version of this band each time we make a record. Because you never know. Every album could be your last album you ever make. So we're gonna make the best one we can ever make at that moment in our lives.
Yeah, and has the overall feedback has the overall feedback been? Have you all been like pretty pleased with what you've heard so far?
I think so. Yeah, I've sure been happy with it. Like, you know, folks are, I think, well, what's been really cool about this album cycle is that folks seem to be really latching on to like kind of the thematic elements that we've been trying to present with Cult of the Serpent Sun. People have been seeing that there's a spirit of community and togetherness that comes through in the lyrics, even if it's kind of from a more sinister perspective of cults and underground societies and light and darkness and kind of contrasting themes and colors there. Like people have been picking up on that, and that's been so cool and so gratifying to see from folks that not only like our music, but that kind of get what we as artists are trying to convey as well.
Yeah.
And just the numbers we've gotten on the video are like for us, we're not a big band. So like immediately getting over like 260,000 streams on YouTube for our first video that was released just last month. Like those are really good numbers for us, and that tells us that people are really resonating with our new sound. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And of course, with the three songs that we've heard so far, for you guys, like which one is like y'all's favorite and why?
Oh, out of the three singles that have come out, so
Yeah.
what? That's Crow, Cult, and the Mystic. I mean, it's hard for me to not say the Mystic. I mean, that song we really, you know, as much as we keep feeding off of the feedback and support that fans have given us live and in like you know social media comments or in person, etc. The Mystic was a bit of new territory for us, and there was a whole discussion about whether it was the right move for the band to make, whether it was you know truly Nite or maybe something more of like a solo project. But we all like no, we feel like the song embodies this band's spirit. It feels like us, and it feels like a new level of maturity, of accomplishment and achievement. I think that one is one that I'm personally quite proud to have been a part of.
All right.
It's a big step. It's a big step forward. It's a different direction, and it's shows that I think that we're willing to kind of push ourselves a little bit outside our own comfort level to try to do something that expands the vision of the band. So, you know, the thing you want to avoid is like writing the same song over and over again. Sure,
Unless if
there's
you're
bands,
AC/DC.
unless you're AC/DC or Discharge or even perhaps Motorhead. But like for us, you know, like as a heavy metal band in 2025, we're trying to make sure we have a sound and an aesthetic and a memorable, like way that we can stick in people's minds, but we also want to expand our horizons as much as possible too.
All right. And of course, I'm talking with the rhythm section. So I'm always curious. I'm guess for you, Avi, as a bass player, and I know you've heard your fair share of bass player jokes and memes and stuff, but I love how you don't gravitate towards flashy bass playing, but instead, I feel like you find ways to link what Van and Scott are doing with the melody and what Pat is doing with the rhythm. So for you personally, like what, like especially with the new album and of course previous albums, what's your approach to slapping a bass?
Well, I play with the pick for one, so there's that. But it's a conversation. It is an ongoing conversation, and the bass has been defined completely differently from like genre to genre, and even within metal. Like, the bass player for Iron Maiden is completely different than the bass player for Metallica. It's completely different than the bass player for R Noir. And so, with a band like Nite, a black and heavy metal band, where we're getting as much of a Maiden influence as we are like, maybe a little bit of like Rotting Christ or Ved Wenzendi or something. Like, you kind of got to keep reevaluating what does the bass mean, not just for this song, but for this part. And so there's times when I'm matching Van and Scott's guitars like nearly note for note as far as the root notes go or even the melodies. There's times when I'm just sticking to my chord note, so to speak, like pedaling on the A and locking in with Pat. There's times when Pat is the metronome and the clock, and I got to follow his catches and his little hiccups and like sometimes keeping straight ahead. There's other times that I become the clock, and that all of a sudden now Pat gets freedom to kind of jump around and do his thing, and it's my job to keep the pulse of the band. And again, verse by verse, chorus by chorus, part by part, even the solos, sometimes I got to do some kind of funny stuff. It isn't, again, a better way to describe it is just an ongoing conversation, and it's constantly evolving.
Yeah. And for you, Pat, being the drummer, because usually the drummer's job is to like keep the beat or the tempo, otherwise they'll turn into a bloodbath. But for of course you being the drummer, do you need to like hear like riffs in order to lay down your parts, or do you usually have like a whole drum part written and the rest of the band writes according to that?
We've done it every way possible. There's been compositions that I've actually introduced a pattern or a rhythm to Van, and he's actually written a guitar riff around that. But I would say most of 80% ish of the stuff is very guitar driven. Although I will say that the band is very bass heavy as far as the direction of the song relies mostly on the bass riff, which like that has to be there for me to play my part properly. And I think the best thing that I can do with this band, because there is so much sort of guitar pyrotechnics that are happening. There's a lot of leads, there's a lot of solos, is knowing that push and pull, like when to really pull back and just allow the guitar to be all of the fireworks. And then there are moments where it becomes about the interplay between the bass and the drums, or just a drum fill, or just a drum pattern that really starts to lead and push the band. But I think that comes with maturity and just experience and just playing. And as we play and mature as musicians, the band is only going to get better. So
All right. All right. And I got a couple more questions for you guys in
yeah.
terms of like the live show, because how different of a mind frame is it to like playing live versus like recording? Are they pretty similar, or are they kind of like completely separate from one another?
Well, so it's interesting. I think to go back to what we are saying about the first two records, because they were such kind of like pandemic isolation sort of exercises for us, we hadn't really considered as much how the songs would perform live, although that's always in the back of our mind. I think with this album, because we were able to sort of road test songs like Crow, Fear the Night, which we played on some of our tours that we did last year, it allowed us to really think about how are these songs going to be received in a live context, right? And it's always, a give and a take. I mean, we're lucky enough to have Van be our engineer and our mixer and our master, and he sort of uses the studio as another tool, as another instrument. So that's always there as part of our, I think, overall aesthetic for the band. But I think really for this album, we knew that we were going to be touring on it. We knew we were going to be playing these songs live. So we identified very specific moments and very specific songs that were like, yes, that's a chorus that people can sing along to. That's a great verse that are going to get people like nodding their heads along with us. That's an amazing lead that's really going to like carry the song like over the top. So I really think that this album in particular was one that we wrote with the live set in mind.
Yeah, yeah, and then of course the final question I want to ask you is coming from California, because California is like a big major market for like entertainment, especially in like LA or stuff. But of course, for like the Bay Area with all like the thrash bands like Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer here and stuff, and there's even like other bands from other genres as well, even like the glam scene. So of course, for you guys, did you feel like comfortable being part of like the metal scene in the Bay Area, or was it the goal for Nite to get outside of California and play in front of like different states, different crowds and stuff?
I mean, both. I mean, that's both of those things are very much true. I mean, uh, Pat's lived in the Bay Area for 20 years. I, was moved here as a teenager. Like this is our home. Like the Bay Area feels like home, and we've developed so many friends and made like we've all played in a bunch of bands here. Like the Bay Area scene very much feels like a welcome place for us. At the same time, we do want to get out. Like, we want this band to play all even more states than we already have, more countries, like as many stages as possible. Like we it's a bubble here. Like it's a very rap bubble, but it is a bubble, and it's one that we get a lot of joy in, but we want to be able to break out and to explore all over the world with
You know,
Night.
I will say, like, to sort of to piggyback off what Avi's saying, like, there's such a great community here, and it's great to be able to play these amazing local shows with bands that we love personally and that push us, to be even better musicians. And it's a great sort of testing ground to be like, cool, like, we just announced our record release show today for the album, which we're going to play in April, and then we get to sort of like test some of these songs in front of our local, you know, community, and then we get to take them to, different stages all over the country. So it's you got to be able to do both. You got to be able to play locally, you got to be able to tour. So we're going to play as many venues as we can and try to spread the message of Night all
Yeah.
over the universe.
Totally. And so kind of also in the end to sort of wrap things up, what's next for Night? I know you just mentioned that you were going to do like a release show like
Yeah.
what show for Cults of the Serpent Sun. So what's next for y'all in terms of like tours and stuff, if you're allowed to say?
Well, we just announced the album release show today, and then we are going to be making another announcement very soon within the next week about a larger tour that we're doing this year, and then eventually, ideally, we're going to be making some larger announcements about festivals and European things. Right now, we can't say anything because
Yeah,
they're
you'll tell me
still
when I
under
turn
wraps.
off the recorder.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's great to have you guys on. It's just any final words you want to say to the viewers that are watching this to close us out?
Um, if folks are interested, thank you. If you're enjoying the music, thank you. If you bought a thing, thank you, thank you, thank you. Seriously, it's been incredible seeing all the support that folks have had for Cult of the Serpent Sun. So I'm just
Yeah.
feeling. Thank you, Richard, for having us.
Yeah. Thanks so
Anytime.
much. Yeah.
Totally. Thank you guys. So everybody, Avi and Patrick from Nite, we'll see you next time.